Right. Hi everyone, I'm Rolf Granholm, currently based at the University of Groningen and supervised by Gert Stulp and Anne Gauthier. And I'll discuss today a bit about how we try to estimate the net contribution of medically assisted reproduction in co-residential completed cohort fertility for a specific cohort in the Netherlands. So for a bit of background, which we've been through several times during this conference already, so one fact is simply that couples are postponing their pregnancies until later and later in their reproductive lives. And this has then sort of raised the issue of infertility for both within couples, but also for policymakers. And we know that as medically assisted reproduction is sort of an effective method of treating infertility within couples. But what we are really trying to look at here is how much does medically assisted reproduction actually contribute to completed cohort fertility? So at the population level, how much of the fertility can we attribute to these treatments? So we know, or most of us know, that there's this more or less linear trend now in high increase in the demand of, and also the share of births that are due to assisted reproductive technologies. So that's the black line, and that's basically the sum of these different types of ART treatments. And then you could simply say that, okay, but is it not then that simple that the observed share of births, that is also the net contribution of medically assisted reproduction? Well, we think that that's a bit too simple of an assumption. One thing is that this does not control for the fact that some of the couples who undergo these medically assisted reproduction treatments might have conceived naturally, given that they took more time in trying to conceive naturally before undergoing this treatment. So that's really one of the main factors that we try to account for in our microsimulation model. And also another factor is that the fertility process is very complex, and it contains a lot of different components. So we have, for example, what's been mentioned at this conference a few times already, these physiological constraints on simply the physiological ability of women or couples to conceive, and that these decline with age. We also have different behavioral factors such as partnering and contraceptive behavior that also alter these reproductive life courses. And also then we have individual characteristics such as the fertility preferences or intended family size, which is the factor that we use. And also education, as we've seen during several presentations, also alters the timing and also the number of children that women have. So our research question then is, what was the net contribution of medically assisted reproduction among Dutch women born between 1974 and 1984? And then sort of what are the implications that we can draw from our simulation analysis, and also some of the parameter adjustments that we do to different components of the medically assisted reproduction process. As the model is quite complex, and it wouldn't make sense for me to try to go through it in terms of, in very sort of, scientific terms, I'll try to do this in a number of pictures. So the model starts off with the individual woman. So it runs for individual women, this simulation model. And also up in the top, you can see sort of the data sources that we use for each step. So the first step is to give every individual woman a level of education. And then we also assign an intended family size to each woman. And then the next sort of step of the simulation is to put the woman through this union formation simulation, where we account for cohabitation, because we're looking now at fertility within co-residential unions, but then also disruptions to cohabitation, so separation, or in the fact of marriage, divorce, but then also repartnering. And sort of the second step of the simulation is to put them through this reproductive part of the model, where we have these physiological constraints, which can start off with the fecundability, so the monthly probability of conceiving, the age of sterility, and also sort of a decline in fecundability over time, and then also a period of non-susceptibility after a birth or a miscarriage, and miscarriage is also something that we include in the modeling. And then we also include induced abortions in the model. And then, of course, the outcome of the model is how many children did these women have, and then sum together, that would be the completed cohort fertility within co-residential unions, also represented by this house here. But the fact of the matter is, of course, that some couples try to conceive but are not successful. So in this case, we have sort of the standard definition of if a couple is unable to conceive within 12 months, and also if they pass sort of a check on having a low enough probability of conceiving naturally, they then enter medically assisted reproduction in our model. And we include all the different types of treatments that were reported by the Dutch registers. So we have intrauterine insemination, in vitro fertilization, ICSI, so intracytoplasmic sperm injection, and then also from frozen embryo transfers. And yeah, in some cases, then this produces pregnancies, and then we get the number of children depending on how successful the woman was. And in the end, we then end up with this sort of synthetic representation of the cohort, which is then representative of this 1974 to 1984 birth cohort. So for the results, let's first look at this net contribution. So so sort of the baseline here, of course, is to have an estimate for what was the share of all births that were attributable to medically assisted reproduction, and we estimated this to be around 3.7%. So the model is also set to produce, in the end, that share of MAR births in the population. So okay, then you would assume, okay, that's then also going to be the net contribution, but that is not the fact. In fact, it's roughly 4 times lower than this sort of aggregate share of the births. And again, this is simply due to the fact that a lot of these women who underwent MAR treatment, given that they tried for a longer period of time, based on our model assumptions, they would have given birth naturally. So that's sort of why it's so much lower. And the absolute contribution is also very small based on our modeling, so around 0.15 children, which is, of course, not a lot when you think that when you see that the completed cohort fertility is around 1.65. Just looking a bit at the sort of in which age groups this contribution was the largest and the smallest, well, as we can expect, it was the lowest for the youngest women because they are the least likely to face these infertility challenges, and highest for the age group 40 plus. But it can be a bit deceptive to just look at this relative contribution, so we also have to look at it in absolute terms, where we can see that the absolute contribution is also very small, even though the relative contribution is very large for this 40 plus group, and that's simply because there are so few births happening in this group, and also because of the fact that these MAR treatments success rates decline rapidly, are already at quite a low level at these ages. So we see that the majority of the contribution is happening between these ages 25 to 39, and particularly 30 to 39, which reflects pretty well the actual empirical data that we have for the Netherlands as well. So then looking a bit at the different components, I'm only including one of them here. So this is the MAR uptake, so the share of eligible women who actually ended up taking treatment. And then the baseline or the reference here is that roughly 70% of them did so. And we can see, although it's sort of looks like quite a sharp increase, we also have to pay attention to the y-axis and see that the changes are actually not very large. So if we go from 0% to 100% uptake, we increase completed cohort fertility by around 0.0 children, which is not a lot. And then looking a bit at the age component as well. So this is the waiting times until starting treatment, which with the standard assumption then of 12 months. So we adjust this from 6 months to 24 months. And quite intuitively, you can see here that the earlier, starting treatment earlier is sort of more effective in increasing the completed cohort fertility if it's done at earlier ages. And this is, of course, also because more of the births are happening in these younger ages compared to the oldest ages. And we see more or less a flat line for this 40-plus group, simply because these two factors of the very few births happening in this group, and also because the treatment success rates are so low for that group as well. And then another factor is looking at the number of IVF and ICSI cycles. So here the standards, or the assumption we have is 3 cycles, because that's also the number of cycles that are reimbursed in the Netherlands for everyone who has basic health insurance. What we can see here is a leveling off more or less after this 3rd cycle that is happening across the groups. But then again, we can see that it's sort of the association sort of gets weaker the older the starting age of treatment, or the older the starting age is. And I'll just quickly go to the conclusions. So what we find with our model is that we can't really expect that medically assisted reproduction will sort of alleviate this fertility decline that we see from postponement of fertility until later ages. And also that estimating or forecasting the contribution of MAR based on past trends in just the aggregate share of MAR births might be overestimating this sort of net or actual contribution of medically assisted reproduction. And but also that a lot of couples who have a fairly good prognosis, fertility prognosis, might also give birth or have a decent chance of giving birth naturally. And then lastly, while we have this component of MAR uptake sort of being the most promising in terms of increasing fertility, it's already at quite a high level, and it's also a matter of preference. So this is whether the woman or couple prefers to undergo treatment or not. And then the second point, I have to adjust a little bit based on Jackie's presentation today, like maybe not as early as possible, but it definitely showed that we should inform women or couples, individuals or couples at an early enough time, both about the benefits but also the limitations of medically assisted reproduction. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.